everyone, and welcome back to Hanna Worldwide and Friends, the podcast about living abroad. Thank you so much for listening again, and if you like it, please share it with your family or friends where you think they could be interested. And if you want to have any notification of new episodes, just go to Spotify and hit the bell. You can also connect with me on Instagram under Hanna Worldwide and Friends and leave a comment in the comment section or just DM in the private messages. Hi everyone, please welcome with me Sorina Lloyd. Sorina is a very emotional and empathetic power woman who left South Africa 5 years ago to start a new life with her husband and 3 children in New Zealand. She has worked many years in leadership positions and is currently a team leader at Analytical Laboratories. Welcome, Sorina.
Hi, thank you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for taking your time to be a part of my show. So I really appreciate that.
That's awesome. I've been listening to your show and I'm really enjoying it, and I feel honored that you've invited me to be part of this.
Thank you. Let's dive right in to the first question. What has been the reason for you and your family to leave South Africa? And why did you choose New Zealand as your new home?
Wow, this is something that's been coming along, I would say, for the last 16 years. My husband has always wanted to leave South Africa since we had our first child. And I have been the one who's been saying no. Because I'm a bit of a homebody. I love being close to my family. I've always been close to my family. Yeah. But eventually I realized that for my kids to have opportunities in life, for them to have a safe environment to grow up in, and for them to be happy and healthy, we needed to make a change. So we were looking at various countries. I pretty much had one condition, and that's I would have wanted to be in a country that they mainly speak English as the first language.
Yeah.
Because I felt that it would have been less of a transition for the kids, because we speak Afrikaans at home. So we were looking at New Zealand, Australia, Canada. Those were our 3 choices. And New Zealand was the first country that I could find a job in. So, we decided on New Zealand, and we haven't looked back since.
That's awesome. You have mentioned that safety was a really important part for you, and I know that a lot of people are not really aware of the situation in South Africa, and since we have had conversations before, and I actually find it really, really interesting, do you mind telling us a little bit more about the safety situation in South Africa and why you thought it's more important to look into other options like New Zealand?
Well, South Africa is a beautiful country. It's very diverse. It has so many different cultures. But there is so much history in South Africa that is unfortunately sad and tragic history. So there's always been this disconnect between black and white people in South Africa. And because apartheid was legal in South Africa for many, many years, once that has been taken away, it's just become really difficult to be in an environment where you feel you can be yourself and your kids can be themselves. And there's this I think it's really, really sad how the country has developed, because there is, I almost want to say, this inherited hatred towards most Caucasian people. And it's really difficult to be yourself and to develop and to be free, if I can put it that way, in South Africa. So where we were living, we were in the Western Cape, which is still a relatively safe area compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah.
But I wish I could show you photos of my house that we had in South Africa. It was really sad that we often had conversations saying that we feel like criminals in our own home, because we had to have burglar bars on all the windows, and we had safety gates on all the doors, and we had wires and walls and alarm systems and armed responses just to keep your property safe. And kids could not run around freely playing in their own backyards or going to the dairy or to the shopping mall or even to school on their own, it's just not a safe enough environment for them to do that. So, we decided that we wanted our kids to have the freedom that we had when we were being raised, when we were kids, because we could have all of those freedoms when I was young, and we wanted something similar for our children. So, yeah, it's as I said, it is an absolutely beautiful country, but it's just, there's so many people and there's so much poverty and unemployment in South Africa that you can almost say you understand how people can think they want what other people have. And in South Africa, people are not afraid to just go and take it.
Yeah.
So it's really, really hard to live in that environment and to raise your children in that environment and teach them to accept people, teach them to love people, teach them to be open for other people when you're constantly afraid.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is pretty much what's happening in South Africa. And since we came to New Zealand, it's just gotten worse. So yeah, it's not a very healthy environment to raise children, I would say.
Yeah. Have you had ever a moment where you really had experienced a situation where you were really worried about the safety of your children?
Well, pretty much any experience you have as a family out, say going to a park or to a mall or anything like that, you wouldn't allow your kids to go around and do their own thing. I know one of the things my kids love doing when we go to a mall or to a toy store or something is they love going off on their own and going looking at all the different toys that's on the shelves and dreaming about what they would want to have for their Christmas or for their birthdays. And we could never do that in South Africa. I always had to have my children with me in the trolley.
Yeah.
I had to always have, I almost want to say, one hand on them, because it's just not safe. You could not leave your kids on their own. We couldn't go to a restaurant and have the kids play in play areas that they have in the restaurants. There's in the family-friendly restaurants where they have this little play area where kids could play. You couldn't leave them there.
Yeah.
Without knowing where they are or without seeing where they are, because it's really, really easy for someone to just walk in and grab your child. So it wasn't a nice environment knowing that you're constantly worried about your children and constantly worried about, are they safe? When they go to school, they had to have, all the schools in South Africa have these massive wires and or fences and things around the schools, and they teach kids not to talk to people on the outside of the fences. They would lock all the gates when the kids get into the school ground. You couldn't just walk in because it was so easy to just grab a child. Yeah. And we constantly heard about these things happening, about children being snatched. So yeah, it's not something that any parent wants to live with. They don't want to have that feeling of, I need to make sure my kids are safe every moment of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, me just being here today, I have left my 2 girls at home. I would never have done that in South Africa.
Yeah.
It's just not an environment that I felt safe to raise my children in.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of other people feel the same way. But it's really sad that that's the case. Have you ever felt unsafe yourself? Because we talk a lot about your children, and I know like children can't defend themselves really, but as an adult, how do you feel about it? Have you felt unsafe?
Well, personally, I have been mugged twice while I was in South Africa. Once was while I was taking public transport home, and another time was while I was waiting for my train. Someone bumped into me and he snatched my possessions, and the house that we were living in had been broken into 3 times.
Wow.
So it's pretty much not a case of being safe or being unsafe. It's a case of, there's a saying that a lot of people say is, if you haven't been a victim of crime, it's just a matter of time.
Oh, God.
So, and I can tell you, most South Africans, if they tell you their story about why they've come to New Zealand, would have some aspect of crime built into that.
Yeah.
Some people, things like, a friend of mine has, their main reason for leaving is he's been held captive in his own home with a firearm. And lots of South Africans have stories like that. And if it was just myself, I would probably have still stayed in South Africa. If it was just my husband and myself, I would probably have still stayed in South Africa, even though safety isn't the only reason we came to New Zealand. But with children, we felt that we needed to give them the life that we had when we were kids. My parents left Zimbabwe when I was a child for exactly the same reason. It wasn't safe in the country any longer, and they felt they needed to give their children opportunities in life. So pretty much what my parents did when I was 5, we've done for our children, and moved them somewhere else where we felt that they would have had the opportunities that they won't have in South Africa.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you came to New Zealand.
Yeah, me too. I'm loving it in New Zealand.
Thinking about, especially we work together and we have our conversations as well, and knowing that, or we talk sometimes about the work situation, especially we currently experience some challenges at work, but I know that you always say, like, I have been through worse. And how was your work life in South Africa?
I worked for a company who was, they were the main, I don't know exactly how to put it. They had their pathology service was basically split into 2. So you had the pathology service for people who had private health insurance, what they called the medical aids, and there were many pathology services who dealt with those patients, and then the majority of the population were people who didn't have medical health insurance, and they would go through the public health system. And the laboratory service that I worked for, they catered for those people. So we processed samples for the majority of the country. But unfortunately, the company that I worked for was a parastatal, which means that it was owned in part by the government. And one of the reasons we left South Africa is because of the fact that our government in South Africa is really, really not good. Mismanagement, corruption, those kind of things. And with us working for a parastatal, those kind of attitudes were very, very evident in everything we were doing. So we had massive red tape. Getting anything that we needed was really, really, really difficult, to the point of almost being impossible. So it wasn't, I mean, I enjoyed working where I was in South Africa because I really felt I was making a difference. Because I used to tell people who were working in the private pathology service and have asked me why I didn't move to the private pathology service. I said, because I feel that I was making a difference to people who couldn't help themselves. Because people who would use the public health system were people who couldn't afford cars to go to a doctor, or they couldn't afford like taxi fare to get to a doctor. They would walk, or they would take a bus, or in a very unreliable public transport system. And they would become really ill before they would eventually go to a doctor, because they had the type of jobs where if you don't work, you don't get paid. So they would continue working even though they were ill, until they got to a point where they physically were not able to work anymore, and then they would go and see a doctor. So it was really, I really felt strongly about that, and because of that I stayed in this company for very long. So I started there as a student many, many years ago, and when we came to New Zealand I was still working for them. So it was close to like 23 years that I'd worked for them in this company, but it wasn't easy. Because we often didn't have the resources we needed in order to provide the service. And when I say resources, there were days we didn't have electricity. There were days when we didn't have water. So we couldn't get any of our instruments running because there was no water available. So it was really challenging, but it was very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah. And it's probably for a lot of people who listen as well, it's really hard to imagine those circumstances, especially at work. And also not having to experience this kind of safety or to worry about safety is probably very interesting to hear from a side of a person who's coming from a country where safety is not a given. Have you ever had like death threats or something like that in your work environment, or even just on the street?
I know, I wouldn't really call them death threats, but I have been, people have been speaking to me in a way that made me feel unsafe. So often you would say something in being completely honest, being really trying to be kind, whatever, and it would be perceived as something really negative, and people would make comments because of the fact that you are white. And even though you understand where people come from, you understand the history behind all of it, it's not really nice if people tell you that they're going to break into your house and steal all your stuff, or they're going to hurt you if you don't get out of the way. It's not a really positive feeling to have. And while I was at work, it had happened a couple of times when we had strike action at work, where people they wanted more money salary wise, and they would do strikes. And strikes in South Africa are quite different from what we used to here in New Zealand. So people would often damage property, assault people who decided they wanted to go to work because they needed to provide for their family. Yeah. Because in that environment, if you didn't work and you were on strike, they have this mechanism of no work, no pay. So if you weren't working while you were on strike, you weren't being paid. And a lot of people felt that they could not afford not to work. So they would come to work and then they would be threatened. So it happened a couple of times while people were striking. I wasn't in management position at the time. So for us, we were not allowed to strike as managers. So we had to go to work and we had to get the samples into the lab, and we had to get the results out. So we would go to work, and yes, people would chant stuff, and they would have this massive mob in front of you, and they would be singing and chanting and stamping their feet and saying things at you, or threatening you and things like that. So yeah, it's not always been fun having to deal with those things.
Yeah, it's really nice to see, because obviously I know you very well now, and to see that you have all your positivity and that you're always wishing other people well, even though you have experienced difficult situations where people physically were threatening you or you didn't feel safe. But I know from the conversations we had that you were still trying to always be the kindest person you could be, and to try to understand where the other person is coming from, even though that must be really difficult as well, because yes, you can understand where the history is from and why they feel the way they feel, or when they are really poor, that they need certain things to survive, but still keeping your positive and that you still believe in the good of the people. That's really impressive. So I really adore that.
Thank you. I can't take all the credit for that, but you mentioned at the start that I'm empathetic, and I think I always try and look at the situation from the other side. Yeah. And it's not always easy and it's not always fun, but I also believe in, if I hold a grudge, it's just going to destroy me. Yeah. So I try and let go. Doesn't mean that I would always go back and trust that person necessarily, because in one of our strike situations, I had a person who I was really, really close with. We were good friends. Yeah. And during the strike, he acted in a way that I just couldn't wrap my head around it, because, you know, he would say things like, the patient comes first and we will do everything we can to help the patient. But during the strike situation, he wasn't taking care of patients. He was throwing samples in the roadside, and he was preventing people from getting samples into the labs. And if you made a comment about that, what about the patient, he would say, you know, what about me? I need to eat. And I almost want to say add the two together, because for me, whether you are on strike or whether you are working, who you are as a person shouldn't change. Yeah. And he mentioned to me that what happens in the strike stays in the strike. And I said, that's fine. If that is who you are and how you feel, that is absolutely fine. But I cannot be a friend to someone like that. I can't see you as a close friend anymore, because our morals and our principles obviously don't match. Yeah. In these kind of situations. So I'll never be rude to you. I will always greet you. I will always be kind. If you need any help with work, I would gladly give that to you, but we're not friends any longer.
Yeah.
So that is usually how I deal with situations like that, is I would let the hurt and I would let the anger, I would let that go.
Yeah.
But the person would not be part of my inner circle any longer.
Yeah.
And I think that is to protect myself from being hurt again. Because if you hurt me once, that's on you. But if you hurt me twice, then it's because I was stupid enough to let you in.
Yeah, definitely. Now, being in New Zealand, the safety part was taken away, or the not feeling safe part. So you mentioned you are feeling very comfortable leaving your children at home, not alone, because some of them are still young, but at least with their siblings, and you don't feel like anything could happen at that time when you are out and about, like right now with me here. So since you feel more safe in this country, and by the way, congratulations, you just received your residency visa as well. So I'm hoping that you are settling here and you want to stay in New Zealand.
Yeah, we would definitely want to stay in New Zealand. I have made so many new friends here, and I almost want to say I have made new family in New Zealand. And I will always, my heart will always be in Africa, but I am at home here. I know where to find what I need. Yeah. I know where to go if I need to be on my own. I know where to go if I need help. Yeah. So I've built a new community in New Zealand, and I recently spoke to my husband about this, and I told him, if you want to leave, you're leaving on your own, because I have found my new home and I'm not going anywhere.
Hopefully that's not going to happen.
No, I don't think so.
Feeling really safe here, that fear has been taken away from you. But is there any new fear coming up now, since you're in a safe environment? Or would you say you feel really content, you feel safe and secure, you don't worry about your children? Or since the main fear of safety has been resolved, is there all of a sudden a new fear which you haven't known before because you never had to focus on something different than safety?
Well, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm a bit of a control freak. So if I can't control my situation, it really, really bothers me. And since we came to New Zealand, I've pretty much having the fear of, I think what every immigrant has is the fear of what happens if you lose your job, or what happens if something goes wrong. Because like most people who come to New Zealand from other countries, I know it's true for South Africans, is you leave everything behind. You leave your family behind, we had a house, we had cars, we had a really comfortable life in South Africa. And you've left all of that behind, and you're going to a country where you're starting from scratch. You have nothing. Yeah. I mean, when we came here, we literally just came with our baggage, and we had to start with everything new here. I think as time goes on, you're starting to become more comfortable where you are. But I think for me, the fears that I now have are mostly geared towards the rest of my family in South Africa, because they're all still there. And how they're dealing with situations and how they are coping. Because when I see any videos about them, about South Africa on any kind of media, it's not gotten any better. Yeah. Actually, it's gotten worse with the way the government is doing things, decisions they're making, how they are not taking care of infrastructures, the corruption, and I almost want to say incompetence of the government that South Africa has. Yeah. So my fears at the moment, I wouldn't say are geared towards our life in New Zealand, although as a parent, I think I'm always afraid for my kids. Yeah. The type of fear is just slightly different. So now I worry more about when they go out, are they safe? Will they come back home safe? What are they doing? Are they protecting themselves? Those kind of fears. And I think that is a universal fear, any parent, and no matter where you are in the world. But I think mostly my fears at the moment are geared towards my family, because they're still in the environment that we've left. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to tell us about your home country, South Africa, which other people wouldn't know? I don't know much about South Africa, except that it's beautiful. It has really nice nature. It's right on the ocean. All these kind of things. But is there anything you want to tell us about South Africa which you think is worth sharing and not many people know about?
Well, I think a lot of South Africans mostly will talk about the negative things because that's the reason that I almost want to say chase them out of the country.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, South Africa really, really is a beautiful country. There are so many cultures in the country. So South Africa has 11 languages, which means there are at least 11 official languages. So there are at least 11, I was going to say, official cultures. But obviously, there's people from all over the world in South Africa as well. And I love the people of South Africa. They're very authentic. If they like you, they'll show you. If they don't like you, they'll show you. So there's very little, falseness among people. So they will show you what they feel. And I think one of the main things, one of the most amazing things is African people, the Black African people, their smiles. Their smiles are so beautiful. I had a conversation with one person once and I asked him why that is, because for me, their smiles are just, I don't know, the whole face lights up when they smile. And he mentioned to me that for them, smiling is really, you don't smile if you don't really feel it. So you smile, your smile comes from within. And it's not a smile that, I almost want to say a polite smile. They don't do polite smiles. If they don't like you or they don't like the situation, they are just not going to be
not smiling,
happy about it.
Yeah.
But when they do smile, when they are smiling or when they are happy about it, their whole face lights up. And you can see that this is a genuine smile. And that's one of the things I really miss, seeing those smiles. I loved working with diverse cultures, with people within South Africa who are completely diverse, and the people there are they're very open, they're very honest, they're very loving.
Yeah.
And it's a rich culture with so many different types of food and how they do things and how they experience things, and listening to their stories and where their names come from when they name their children. All of those kind of things are absolutely fascinating. And I think sometimes South Africans do South Africa a bit of injustice, because they will share the negative stories, but they often don't share the good ones. And I loved living in South Africa. I really, really enjoyed being there. And as I said, if I didn't have children, I probably would have stayed.
Yeah.
Because there's a saying that you could leave Africa, or you can take the girl out of Africa, but you can never take Africa out of the girl. And that is absolutely true. It becomes part of your DNA. And even people that I meet here who have visited South Africa come back and say there's just something special and magical about South Africa. I absolutely love the country. It's beautiful. It's diverse. It's amazing. And if I could be safe, I would gladly go back and live there.
Yeah, I love that. I also really would love to go there one day. Of course, with being careful and taking care and taking all the safety measurements, but really would love that. And one thing I was wondering about was, have you ever seen The Big Five? And for everyone who doesn't know what that means, is the Big Five for Africa is the lion, the leopard. Is that how you pronounce it?
Leopard.
Oh, yeah. We would say in German leopard. Therefore, it's the lion, the leopard, the rhino, the elephant, and the buffalo.
Yes, I have seen all of them.
All of them?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I have to say that they're not as everywhere as a lot of people think.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people think that there are lions walking around in the streets and stuff like that. They are concentrated to game farms and preserves, or reserves, I think is the right word. But they're all still there, and you don't really have to travel very far to be able to go and see them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an awesome experience to see them. But there's so many other animals that I really enjoyed seeing, and not just the big five. There's lots and lots and lots of different antelope or deer in South Africa, and things like hippos and crocodiles and things like that. So yeah, lots and lots of diverse animals in South Africa.
Yeah. It's really nice to hear from you how you describe the country, because I read a book. It's from John Strzelecki, and he is calling it Big Five for Life. And he has another book which is called The Safari of Life, I think. And it's like kind of a combination. One book is The Big Five for Life, which is more about business and the understanding of when people do well, they will also contribute to a good company and things like that. But it goes back to the Safari of Life, where he describes that the main character travels to Africa and is meeting really wise people and talking about that feeling of, like, we have big five of Africa, which are representing the five big animals. But for him, it's like, what do you want to see in life? Which five things you have on your to-do list that as soon as you have seen or done these things, you don't feel any regret, and you are pretty much ready to die. Not that you should die, anything like that, but you are pretty much ready, and you don't feel like, okay, no, I had so much more I needed to do. You feel more like content and happy, and you don't fear death. I think that's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
Not like you're ready to die, but you're not afraid of dying anymore, because you have achieved the things you wanted to achieve. And since the whole story is playing in Africa as well, it always reminds me on that beauty of the country. There's so much wisdom and knowledge, and yeah, it's like, as you said, kind of magical, and it's really a place I would really love to see. And I know sometimes it's better to go with someone from there who knows where to go, what to do, what not to do. So yeah, hopefully one day I will make my way over there as well. And that's definitely also one of my big five, to travel more, to see this beautiful country and what it's like giving us in the world. Like, there are so many people who want to see Africa, so there must be that magic somewhere. And yeah, as you said, when people come back, they kind of take this part with them as well. Yeah, very exciting.
It definitely it shapes you.
Yeah.
And even if you have negative emotions about the country or the continent, there's always something in your heart that is like that little special spark that if you just give it a little bit of attention, it will become this huge fire, and then you'll be passionate about it again. And that's amazing. And that's that. I think that is the part of Africa and South Africa that I miss, is that little spark that, you know, if you give it a little bit of firewood and you give it a little bit of attention, it will just become this massive fire once again. Yeah.
You mentioned that you really love about African people, that they are really authentic, and that they are showing you, okay, I'm happy, I want to be your friend, I like you, or I don't. Did you feel like it was difficult for you coming into a new country like New Zealand and making new friends? Do you feel like people are generally open to make new friends here, or do you have a feeling of it's very different from where you come from?
I do think New Zealanders are a lot different, very, very different from South Africans. But I have noticed that there's so many people from all across the world in New Zealand. But one thing that I have been warned about even before we came to New Zealand is that South Africans are very direct people. So they tell it like it is, and there's no, I almost want to say filter, if I can put it that way. So a lot of people have said just remember when you go to New Zealand, New Zealanders tend to find South African very crass or very abrupt or rude sometimes, because they don't sugarcoat anything. They will say it like it is. So they come across as something that they're not. And I have noticed that is something that I've had to learn to adjust how I talk to people, how I present myself to people, because they might find me intrusive, but that's not my intention. I really do have good intentions when I ask certain questions. And I actually have an example of that. We had a lady in our HR who, Desanita, who when she started working there, she came into the office where I was sitting with some other New Zealanders. We were sharing an office, and she walked in and she said, "Hi, my name is Des," and I said, "Hi, I'm Sorina," and I started asking her questions about her life. And we'd never met each other before, and I was asking her about her husband and her family and where she comes from and where she lived and whatever. And she just answered all my questions. And when she left, one of the other people who is native in New Zealand turned around and she said, "That was really, really scary." And I said, "Why?" She said, "You were so intrusive. You were just asking all these questions, one after the other. It's like this rapid fire." And she just answered all your questions. And I said, "But that's how we are. There's nothing wrong with meeting a new South African and asking them about their whole history." Whereas here, you get to know people first before you start asking personal questions about their life. And that's something that I'm really fortunate I was warned about before I came to New Zealand, because I have friends who have been here for way longer than I have. But that is something really weird. I find it really, really weird that people here are almost, want to say, they're careful. They're really careful in how they interact with other people, which in my opinion can come across as not being authentic, because it kind of comes across as you're hiding who you really are behind politeness. But if you realize that's how people are, and it doesn't mean that what you see is the real person, you just have to learn to adapt, and you have to learn to work with that. But I have to say I'm really fortunate in the job that I had in South Africa, because I am a white female and I worked with a lot of black people with the history in South Africa. And being a manager, you have to be really careful how you talk to people, because people are really, this whole apartheid and racism situation or topic is so volatile. You have to be really careful how you talk to people. So I think that has prepared me a little bit in thinking about what I want to say before I actually say it, because I think it would have been a lot less easy for me to interact with people if I didn't have that experience in South Africa, where I had to think about what I was saying and how I was going to say it before I say it. I think a lot of people would have found me very, very rude here in New Zealand if I did not have that experience in South Africa.
It's funny how you say it, because it's really hard for me to imagine you being rude or picturing you being rude, because you're always so lovely. But I can imagine that certain ways of talking just can come across quite different, and knowing that you always have good intention is really helpful. But of course, if someone doesn't know you, then it's not really, like, it doesn't matter if you have a good intention if it's not coming across as such. And I have had a lot of people from overseas who were mentioning to me that they found that New Zealander usually are liking to be under themselves. Like, they would rather stay with New Zealanders and struggle a little bit to open up to other cultures. Or the people from overseas would find it quite difficult to make friends with Kiwis. They are always friendly, so they never say they are not friendly. They just feel like to actually become their friends, they were struggling quite a bit. Would you agree? And how is your experience in that case?
Yes, I would agree. If I look at the South African culture in New Zealand, there are so many South Africans in this country. I mean, I can't go to the shopping mall or to the supermarket without hearing Afrikaans being spoken. There really, really are. I think there's close to like 200,000 South Africans in New Zealand. So the South African community here is really large. And I do see that South Africans tend to stick together as well. And I think that's normal, if I can put it that way, because I know my humor is not the same as the Kiwi humor. And I might make a joke that people won't get. And other South Africans would understand exactly what I'm talking about. And I think it is a normal mechanism of protecting yourself, I can put it that way, to kind of want to stick with the people you know, the culture you know, the environment that you know. But I mean, I've made really great Kiwi friends in New Zealand. But I do think people, and I think that's a human thing. I don't think it's specific to New Zealand. People do. If I have 6 New Zealanders there and 6 South Africans, I would gravitate towards the South Africans. Because they understand me. And I think that might be why the New Zealand people do that. Why the Kiwis do that is because they feel comfortable. They can, I almost want to say, be themselves without being judged. Or misunderstood is a better word. They might say something that other people will not understand in the context they meant it, because we don't understand necessarily what their culture is. So, I mean, I've never had a person being rude to me because I'm South African. But I have found that it is easier to be friends with the people who understand you than to be friends with people who don't know you. But I think that's a human thing. I don't think that's just specific to New Zealand.
I like that you say it this way, because we are all human, and I think it happens in every country. And it just happens to be, for example, for me, the first country I go to and live far away from home. And so I also can just say what I experience in New Zealand. And I'm really fortunate as well to call a lot of Kiwis my friends as well. Everyone is really open towards me. But I can also imagine it's because I don't have a large community of Germans here, even though I know we are everywhere. I'm sure we have a lot of Germans in New Zealand, but I have not actively looked for a community. And sometimes I have to say I miss it, not having people around me where I can speak my own language with when I need it. I have a few German friends here. A lot have left the country already. They were just doing work and travel, or they have not had the chance to get the residency and had to go back, or they just felt like it's time for the next step. So I have a few German friends here in New Zealand, and sometimes it's great to just be able to call them and to just have a nice little chat. And I do have to say, when I come across a German person, which I have not known before, there is this instant connection because of the same culture and because of the same language. So I do understand as well that, as you said, people are comfortable, and sometimes it's easier to stick with what you know. Being so lucky to see that we both have a really nice group of friends here, and also including Kiwis and Maoris, and it's just really amazing to have this diversity and learning so much about different cultures, I guess, is what I love about it as well.
And I think that people tend to stick, like you said, with their own culture, and they want to, because that's where they feel safe. If I have to think about everything I say when I say it in English, because I have to translate from Afrikaans into English before I can say it. But when I'm with other Afrikaans people, I can just speak. I almost want to say I don't have to think about what I'm going to say. It just comes naturally because that's how I grew up. But if I look at my kids, for instance, I can see I have three children, and they're at different ages, and I can see the youngest one thinks in English. So she would gravitate more towards New Zealanders because she thinks in English. Whereas my oldest son, he's still very Afrikaans, because when we came to New Zealand, he was a teenager. So I almost want to say his culture was formed already. So if there is a group of people, South Africans and Kiwis, he would gravitate more towards the South Africans. And I just think it's because that's where you feel comfortable. That's where your safety net is, if I can put it that way. Because you don't have to worry about, are they going to misunderstand my joke or my idiom or my saying, because do I have to explain something to them if I make a comment that is not something that they would be used to?
Yeah.
And I think that will happen anywhere where you go.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you. At the end of the conversation, I usually have my quick 3, which means I ask you 3 questions where I would love you to please answer in 1 word or 1 sentence.
I will try.
There's no penalty for more, but it's just to kind of have the essence of like the main meaning for you. So, question number 1. If you would have to move countries again, and I know we have talked about it in the beginning of this conversation, which country would you choose?
I would love to live in Canada. I think Canada is a beautiful country and I would love to spend some time there.
Yeah, great. I hear a lot of people saying Canada would be an option for them. I don't really know why, because I've heard it's really cold.
I happen to love the cold, so
there we go.
Would be good for me.
All right, number 2. What do you miss the most from South Africa?
I think everybody would say their family, but I'm not going to say my family because that's a given. That's pretty much everything. But I think what I would miss the most is a good braai vleis. Because New Zealanders, they do barbecue. Yeah. And for South Africans, barbecue is a chip flavour. So I would miss a really good braai where you build your fire from logs and you have a nice evening where everyone gets together and they're all around the fire and it's about the experience more than the food.
Yeah.
I think that's what I miss the most.
Great answer. And last but not least, number 3. What do you love the most about New Zealand?
Oh my goodness, that's a difficult one because, I think... No, it's actually not a difficult one. I love the fact that I can get on my bicycle and I can go pretty much anywhere I want to. And there is a safe place for me to be on my bike. And they're actually... What's the word I'm looking for? They're actually building roads specifically for bicycles. I love that because I love spending time on my bicycle.
That's a very unique answer. Thank you very much. It's funny that you say that because I'm from Germany. So for us, we have a lot of bicycle roads specifically built for biking. And for me, for my taste, I still miss a little more infrastructure for bikes here in New Zealand. So it's funny how we come from different places. Yeah. But yes, I do agree. I never feel not safe when I ride my bike here. So yeah, thank you very much. We are also at the end now. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too. It was great. So thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you all have a good day and hopefully see you next time. Bye bye.